Welcome, everyone. We're just going to give everybody a few more seconds to dial in, and we will get started shortly. All right. Welcome, everyone, to another NAMI at noon. As always, I'm Amy Brundle. I'm the Marketing and Communications Manager here at NAMI North Carolina, and I'm thrilled to welcome everybody to this webinar today. First of all, as always, we'd love to thank the North Carolina Division of Mental Health, Developmental Disabilities, and Substance Use Services for today's webinar. Thanks to always to DHHS for their unwavering support. A couple of housekeeping items. If you have any questions for today's speaker, if you would please use the Q&A section. It's at the bottom of your screen. You can fill out questions there, and we'll either be answering them live at the end of the presentation or during the presentation in a private message. Also, we will be sending out any materials that the speaker provides, as well as a video and a feedback survey by the end of this business week. If you are attending our session live and are interested in NBCC CEU credit, those certificates will be sent out towards the end of next week. So just be patient with us. We'll get all those processed and emailed to you as soon as we can. And now I'm honored to welcome today's special guest, Amber Reed. Amber is a health and wellness coach specializing in mental wellness with a focus on integrating nutrition, lifestyle changes, and gut health into recovery plans. She's been a certified health coach since 2019 and a national board certified health and wellness coach since 2020. As a doctoral student in clinical nutrition, Amber is dedicated to exploring the intersection of nutrition and mental health, aiming to empower individuals with the tools and knowledge needed for sustainable recovery. She's also passionate about sharing her own mental health experiences and supporting peers in achieving their own recovery. Welcome, Amber. We're so glad to have you.
Thank you, Amy. It is definitely my pleasure to be here today. Are we ready to get started?
We are ready.
We are ready. Let me share my screen with everyone. Okay, so just a quick check. Amy, you can see my screen. It's up.
I can. It looks great.
Perfect. Thank you. Okay, so welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us here today. Like Amy said, my name is Amber Reed. I am a health and wellness coach, and I am a doctoral student in clinical nutrition at the Maryland University of Integrative Health. I'm very honored to be able to share this information with you today. And we're actually going to talk a lot about mental health recovery, but through the lens of energy metabolism. And so I've shifted the title slightly, but we're still talking about nourishing minds. What does that look like in terms of supporting the microbiome, the gut, the brain, your metabolism in the form of mitochondrial energy? Okay. So, whether you're a practitioner, an advocate, someone with lived experience like myself, I hope this talk does empower you with tools to address root causes and then support recovery really from the inside out. Just a little disclaimer moving forward. The information within this presentation, the handouts that I'm going to have sent to you are strictly for educational purposes. It's not meant to treat, diagnose, or replace your qualified medical team. And I do encourage you to contact your medical professionals prior to implementing any new changes, whether it's something that we have discussed here today or other changes you're wanting to make. So for today's objectives, we're going to talk about how nutrition and lifestyle interventions support mental health recovery. And we're going to have that special focus, like I was mentioning, on the gut brain mitochondria axis. And we're going to specifically look at ketogenic metabolic therapies or therapeutic carb restriction. What does that look like? I get a lot of questions about this. And so it is a new up and coming treatment option that I think many people they're curious about, but they're not really sure what it is. So our goals for today, we're going to start by really laying the foundation of how these different areas communicate: the gut, the brain, the mitochondria, what that looks like, what happens when the system breaks down. We'll look at lifestyle interventions that can help restore that balance. And then we'll have that special focus on the field of metabolic psychiatry, okay, that's being put out there really by the several prominent doctors in this field: Dr. Chris Palmer, Dr. Georgia Ede, Shabani Sethi. So many doctors climbing on board with this and really pushing this message. And then we'll walk through some key nutrients to support brain health, neurotransmitters, as well as immune resilience, and how to put all of this knowledge into practice. Okay. So I routinely, I work within mental health. I have for over a decade now, really. And I routinely see clients who have put all of their eggs in one basket. They haven't been given additional options. They often think medication is going to be a magic bullet, and we know that it's not. Oftentimes, I see that the idea of nutrition, lifestyle interventions, is really brushed off. They may think it's important, but they don't really think that it's going to be a big enough change or help them in a significant enough way to see improvement. But from my perspective, and my personal experience with mental health, these changes are really the foundation. It's the lifestyle, it's the nutrition, it's the sleep, it's all of those things that are foundational in changing that trajectory towards mental health recovery. So I tend to think of it like this. All right, we're in this boat, we're in this rowboat, and for far too long, those within the mental health system have been rowing their rowboat with one oar. Okay, looking at only the aspect of the brain. All right, everything's in the brain. It's a brain problem, right? So we're rowing with this one oar. But the problem is that when you row with one oar, you row in a circle. So we never get to the shoreline. We never get to that mental health recovery. All right. We need to add in our second oar. And so I see that second oar as being really the gut microbiome. All right. And so by using both oars, we can really navigate ourselves, our loved ones, our clients, whoever we happen to be working with, towards recovery. And it's this microbiome gut brain axis, okay, that really impacts how all this comes together. Okay. And you can see my little rower in there. That's actually a mitochondria, and he's the workhorse. He is the one who is rowing and bringing this information together and creating signals to signal to the microbiome, to signal to the brain, giving it energy, navigating that sea of inflammation, stress, everything that we go through, trauma. Okay. So thinking about this analogy as we move forward today, do you have both oars in the water? And are your mitochondria strong enough, efficient enough to help you use those oars to get to shore? So I'd like for you to rethink how we view mental illness. Okay. What if it's not just a chemical imbalance or a genetic type of disorder? We've been told those two things for decades. It's in your genes or it's a chemical imbalance. But what if it's really more about being an energy imbalance? Okay, an energy crisis, if you will. In fact, emerging evidence from highly respected metabolic psychiatrists that I've mentioned previously, and other researchers are actually reframing mental illness as a disorder of energy metabolism. So when mitochondria, which are the powerhouses of the cell, okay, represented by my rower in my boat, okay, when they fail to produce enough energy in the form of ATP, which is our body's energy currency, it's what gives us the energy to run metabolism and to have all these different processes and um, reactions occur within our body. Okay, when we don't have enough of that critical energy source, the brain suffers, its function suffers. Okay, because every function of the brain requires energy, from neurotransmitter synthesis to electrical signaling, and that energy comes from the mitochondria. All right, so research is now also linking mitochondrial dysfunction to not only physical diseases, all right, we see it in specific mitochondrial types of disorders, but also chronic illness, chronic disease. Those physical types of diseases are now being linked to mitochondrial dysfunction, but it's also being linked to nearly every serious mental illness. Okay, and these are just studies that we've started to see come out within the last 5 to 10 years. Okay, but these studies do show that reduced ATP production and increased oxidative stress in the brains of those people who are affected by depression, bipolar disorder, and schizophrenia. And I'm hoping that as you'll see as we go through this, nutrition and lifestyle interventions can restore energy and resilience. And if we can restore that energy metabolism, particularly at that mitochondrial level, then we can help the brain to function more optimally and pave that road to mental health recovery. We can make it to that shore. Now, why does this matter? Okay, well, it matters because currently we are seeing epidemic increases, really, in depression, anxiety, bipolar disorder, suicide. Suicide, hit a record uh, just last year. So at the same time, though, obesity, diabetes, non alcoholic fatty liver disease, also now known as metabolic associated um, fatty liver disease, all signs of metabolic breakdown. Okay, so mental health, physical health have that common metabolic link. And estimates now suggest that 93% of Americans have some form of metabolic dysfunction. Most psychiatric care focuses solely on symptoms, however, and we're still focusing that mental health is just in the head. Okay, but it's not. Mental health is a whole body type of experience. And so psychiatric care for a long time really hasn't focused on what are the roots of mental health, but really about how can we ease symptoms. Okay, and that's important, right? We all want to ease symptoms, but we have to start focusing on what are these metabolic roots that are creating those symptoms. Okay, now medications can be helpful for some, but we do know that there is a substantial portion of the mental health population who are treatment resistant when it comes to medications. Okay, if we look across the full spectrum, we're looking at 20 to 60%, depending on the specific condition you're looking at. So, for instance, for depression, it's about 30% we see with treatment resistance. So, again, medications can be helpful for some, but not for everyone. And even the medications aren't really getting to that root cause, they're treating symptoms. Okay, so think about how can we address inflammation, nutrient deficiencies, insulin resistance, mitochondrial dysfunction. That's where we're going with this today. And I won't spend time going over a lot of the statistics that we've commonly seen, but I do want you to understand that people with depression have a 40% higher risk of cardiovascular and metabolic diseases in the general population. People with serious mental illnesses are nearly twice as likely to develop these conditions. And so I just saw a statistic, I think it was this morning, as I was reading over some other things, talking about how those metabolic types of illnesses, about just under 70% of those with schizophrenia have some sort of metabolic derangement. It's just under 40% for those with bipolar disorder, if that kind of helps put it in perspective, um, those rising rates and what we are really facing. Okay. They've also found that uh, there was a longitudinal study of about 5,000 children, and they followed them from birth to 24 years old. And what it showed was that those with the highest levels of insulin resistance, beginning at age 9, that they were 5 times more likely to have a psychosis risk mental state, as well as 3 times more likely to already be diagnosed at 24 years of age with bipolar or schizophrenia. Okay. And this does suggest that metabolic issues can come first. Okay. A lot of times we think about the medications and the lifestyles linked to these conditions as creating these metabolic conditions, when in fact it can actually go in both directions. Okay. So I hope that gives you a little bit of background of where we are with this. Now to kind of start to set the stage for the foundation. I'm talking a lot about metabolism. So many of you may be wondering, well, what is metabolism? Okay. Metabolism is often oversimplified simply as how we burn calories, right? But in reality, it's the entire symphony of those biochemical processes that transform food into energy and then utilize that energy to keep us alive and well. So, metabolism is actually essential for life. Without metabolism, we do not have life. Okay. So, first, we transform nutrients into that ATP, that energy currency that I mentioned, and then utilizing that energy for those crucial processes. Okay, that could be anything from firing neurons to producing neurotransmitters to detoxifying harmful compounds, balancing hormones. You get the idea. And then lastly, healthy metabolism includes a way to restore. Okay, so this restoration, the ability of mitochondria to repair themselves, to bounce back from stress, that whole idea of resilience. Do you have metabolic resilience, mitochondrial resilience, stress resilience? We hear some of these terms quite commonly, but without restoration, without that time to rest and repair, we see burnout, we see fatigue, we see the symptoms that often get labeled as mental illness as well. And this is probably really the best place to highlight Dr. Chris Palmer's work on the theory of mental illness, the brain energy theory of mental illness. And he really highlights how mitochondrial impairment affects neuronal signaling and how that can lead to psychiatric symptoms. Okay, so impaired metabolism means impaired mental health. And so his book, Brain Energy, is a great resource for anyone interested in learning more. Now, this axis, okay, the microbiome, gut, brain, mitochondria axis, okay, it's a mouthful and it's very complex, but it is a powerful framework for understanding mental health. Okay, at least the understanding that we are starting to have about what mental health is and what drives it. Okay, so essentially it goes something, like this. The gut microbes communicate with the brain through various pathways. Okay, it could be the vagus nerve, it could be immune signaling, it could be endocrine, hormonal types of pathways. Okay, and then those microbes produce compounds like short chain fatty acids, which can regulate brain plasticity, they can help regulate mood. But the microbiome, if it's not in a healthy state, if it is dysbiotic, okay, it can produce harmful bacteria, or the bacteria can produce harmful substances that then leak out into circulation. And some of those products include lipopolysaccharide, and that can trigger inflammation and it can damage brain function. And they often use LPS in the lab to induce depression in mice when they're studying this. Okay. And so mitochondria sense and respond to many of these signals. They adjust energy output, they adjust immune activity. And so it's really this axis, these bidirectional loops that help explain why mental health is so deeply tied to our digestive health, to our microbiome health, okay, to immune balance, and now to mitochondria and energy metabolism. So this is a highly interconnected axis, and it can be a very powerful framework, although it is complex. It can be beneficial to use as a backdrop for understanding mental health. Okay. So imagine a triangle with three major forces driving mental illness. Okay. And we know that there are several forces that drive mental illness. All right. But think about it in terms of inflammation, oxidative stress, and then physiological chronic types of stressors. Okay. Each one fuels the others. All right. So with chronic inflammation, whether from infection, trauma, poor diet, or gut dysfunction, we see increased intestinal and blood-brain barrier permeability. So stuff can pass in and out when it's not necessarily supposed to be able to. All right. Now, oxidative stress, which is called by excess reactive oxygen species. Okay, this is why you take antioxidants, and people talk about the benefits of colorful plant foods. Okay. But that oxidative stress can damage mitochondrial enzymes. It can damage DNA. And because of that, it can impair energy production and even trigger cell death. If we think about chronic psychological types of stressors, okay, you can think about unresolved trauma, that chronic stress that we are inundated with in today's fast-paced world. Okay, this amplifies both of the other forces as well. So, that chronic stress, it does raise cortisol, it disrupts immune function, it alters microbiome composition. And so it's really together that these factors form feedback loops that erode mental health from the inside out. And you can see, again, there's our rower and our two oars. We've got the gut microbiome, the brain, and then the mitochondria essentially trying to navigate those major forces from the environment. So I've mentioned this briefly before, but I want to make sure that I hone in just a little bit. Okay, but this is the concept of a leaky gut. And what we mean when we're talking about a leaky gut, we're really talking about increased intestinal permeability. And it can be triggered by poor diet, stress, infections, toxins. Okay. And really what happens is we have what they call tight junctions between the cells in the gut. And when they become compromised, they allow substances like that LPS, that lipopolysaccharide that I mentioned previously, to pass and enter into the bloodstream. Okay, this creates an inflammatory sort of endotoxemia, is how it's referred to quite often. And so once in circulation, LPS then activates the immune system and it increases the permeability of the blood-brain barrier. It can cross into the brain and so contributes to what we call leaky brain. So a lot of times when we see leaky gut, we see leaky brain. And this can lead to things like neuroinflammation, which we know is a driver of mental health concerns as well. Okay, it's linked to depression, anxiety, brain fog, neurodegeneration, all sorts of conditions that fall under that mental health label. All right. So you can think about um, this idea of leaky gut, that intestinal and it permeability as being, whereas it's supposed to more or less be like a solid water hose, okay, where we allow things to come in and out in a regulated fashion. A leaky gut, really think about that as being that soaker hose that you put in the garden, and then stuff comes out from all over the hose because it's really sort of permeable. And so you've got water coming out all over the place. And that's what is really happening in that leaky gut scenario. Okay. Think, things are being allowed to pass out when technically maybe they shouldn't be. All right. So now what can we do about this? One thing that we can do is to increase short chain fatty acids. And one of those is butyrate. It is made by gut bacteria when they digest fiber. Okay. And that can help repair gut lining and reduce brain inflammation. That's part of the reason why fiber is an important part of many healthy dietary interventions. Okay. So think about how can you increase fiber. We'll talk about how to do that as well as we go through. Right. Now looking at that inflammatory arm, thinking of our triangle, okay, inflammation can alter neurotransmitter balance. All right, it not only affects our mood, but how our brain produces those neurotransmitters. So when the body is inflamed, it activates a specific enzyme called IDO. We'll call it IDO for short today. Okay, but that diverts tryptophan, which tryptophan is the amino acid that then leads to serotonin production. Many of us know serotonin in terms of mood regulation. Okay, but IDO, when inflammation is present, diverts tryptophan away from serotonin synthesis and into a neurotoxic pathway called the kynurenine pathway. Okay, so this shift will actually decrease serotonin, okay, which again will impact mood, sleep, emotional regulation, and it will increase the production of potentially neurotoxic substances. All right, now these changes can contribute to and worsen depression, irritability, brain fog, those cognitive symptoms that we were just discussing. Okay, and what you're going to see as we go through this is that nutrients like vitamin B6 are essential cofactors in both serotonin as well as the kynurenine pathway, but also for the synthesis of other neurotransmitters like dopamine. We also have magnesium and zinc that play an important role in calming inflammation and calming inflammation, calming stress, right? And restoring that neurotransmitter balance. And so by reducing inflammation and ensuring that we have adequate nutrient intake, we can help to rebalance this crucial system as well. So I hope you're starting to see how all of these pieces come together. It's not that we're saying that all of our previous ideas about mental health were incorrect. No, they were all correct in their own way. But what we're talking about today is how do they all come together? And that is through metabolism. Okay. So speaking of metabolism, we're back to this idea of mitochondria. All right. Now, they aren't just energy factories. A lot of times, if you remember back to high school biology, right, we learned about them as being the powerhouses of the cell. And while they are our energy factories, that's not all they do. Okay. They are master regulators. Okay. Of cellular health, metabolism, brain function. Actually, the brain uses more energy than any other organ. So it's about 2% of the body weight, right? But it uses about 20% of the energy. So when mitochondrial output drops, when the energy levels that it's producing drops, brain function is one of the first systems to be affected. So mitochondrial dysfunction actually leads to low ATP production, oxidative stress, and cell signaling disruptions. All of those are seen in mental health conditions. from depression to bipolar, anxiety, schizophrenia. We could go on and on. And research has found an abnormal mitochondrial gene expression, specifically in bipolar disorder. They have found decreased mitochondrial density, specifically in depression. And they have found impaired oxidative phosphorylation, which is part of energy metabolism, okay, in schizophrenia. And so supporting mitochondria through nutrition, through movement, restorative sleep, can dramatically improve our mental clarity, our emotional stability, our resilience. And so you can kind of see on the diagram there just how all of this comes together. You can see mitochondria there in the middle, but you can see the gut microbiome. You can see all the different spots where inflammation is rearing its ugly head and how that can lead to things like depression and other mental health concerns. Now, if we look at the standard American diet, we are really talking about a diet that is high in sugar, a lot of processed grains, seed oils, and it is very um, inflammatory. It promotes insulin resistance, it promotes that oxidative stress, and it is linked to higher rates of depression and anxiety. Okay. And I've seen data saying that anywhere, the more ultra processed foods that you eat, right, the greater your risk of having a mental health concern. And that range goes anywhere from 25 to closer to 50% increase in your risk based on the amount of ultra processed foods you are consuming. And unfortunately, the average American's caloric intake is made up of over 60% of these ultra processed foods. So it really does undermine every level of mental and metabolic health. So if we take this a step further, okay, and look at insulin resistance. Now, this is a central but often overlooked driver of both metabolic and mental illness, okay? So when cells become resistant to insulin, they can no longer effectively take up glucose. And glucose is a brain source for, as an energy source for the brain, right? But this causes a functional brain energy crisis when it's not able to take up that glucose, especially in regions like the prefrontal cortex in the front, the hippocampus, right? All of those critical brain regions that are essential for mood regulation, cognition, executive functioning. Okay. And research shows that individuals with serious mental illness often exhibit signs of insulin resistance, even in the absence of obesity or diabetes. Okay, so you can have these metabolic disturbances without outwardly showing signs of it. Okay, but insulin resistance does increase inflammation, it elevates that oxidative stress, and it can disrupt neurotransmitter balance. And this is really where we start shifting into what are some of the dietary strategies. Okay, so this is where ketogenic metabolic therapy offers a unique advantage. Okay, so ketones directly fuel mitochondria. They allow for the brain to shift from using glucose to using ketones as a source of energy, and that can reduce oxidative stress um, and inflammation, and it really makes them a promising therapy for treatment resistant conditions. So some of the benefits of ketones, especially you can think of beta hydroxybutyrate, if some of you are interested in what some of those are. Ketones aren't just fuel, they're signaling molecules and they change gene expression. We hear a lot about epigenetics, right? When we think about mental health. And so this is one of the key mechanisms. Ketones can through epigenetic modification can turn on protective genes involved in stress resistance, metabolism, inflammation. Okay. And this is really a really exciting area because other lifestyle factors like sleep, exercise, stress management, social connection, things we know work in mental health conditions also shape genetic expression through these same pathways. Okay, so ketones support these as well. And so they also act as metabolic modulators, all right? And they have therapeutic effects across several critical pathways involved in mental illness, involved in metabolic dysfunction. And so ketones increase mitochondrial biogenesis, or the creation of new mitochondria, and they reduce inflammatory markers. They promote GABA and reduce glutamate, which can be excitatory, and we see imbalances in that system with several mental health concerns. And they can also help with lowering that inflammation that, like we talked about, drive um, serotonin and melatonin um, synthesis, okay, instead of those neurotoxic compounds. And so these shifts really improve mood, focus, right, cognitive abilities. So if we look at the spectrum of therapeutic carb restriction, okay, one thing I want you to take from this is that there is a range, okay, and it's really about matching your intake to your need. All right, so therapeutic carbohydrate restriction, that's the full name, TCR, okay, exists on a spectrum or a sliding scale. And many people benefit from reducing carbs below 130 grams, which is really kind of the cutoff point for what is a carb restrictive diet. Okay. But deeper restriction often brings more significant effects, especially for those who have metabolic or psychiatric conditions. So those may require below 50 grams a day to actually enter ketosis. And then if we're looking at really serious, severe mental illness or epilepsy, things of that nature, it may even need to go lower, below 30 grams a day, 30 grams of carbohydrates a day to get that sustained ketosis. Okay, but the idea is that personalization is key. Match your level of restriction to the degree of your dysfunction, your needs, and your goals. All right. And always, when you're moving into a therapeutic sort of plan, working with a trained professional who can help guide you. Because as you move in through some of these different approaches, I'll show you here. Here's a couple of different approaches. But as you move through these, the more restrictive you get as your symptoms improve, you're going to require, there's the potential to have, have medications adjusted and all sorts of things. So I want to put those cautions out there as well. But there are a lot of different diet styles that can achieve those therapeutic carb restrictive goals, right? And there's no single way to do it, but it's about choosing the approach that works best for each person's body, lifestyle, food preferences. Okay, so a classic ketogenic diet is strict, but it may be necessary, like I mentioned, for those with epilepsy or bipolar disorder, OCD. Just some new research came out just the other day looking at it for even things like OCD. So others may need more of a modified Atkins or a Mediterranean keto style. That allows for more flexibility, might feature more foods like fish, olive oil, vegetables, allows for maybe a little more protein, some fluctuation within that. And there's even plant-based options, exclusively plant-based options, really, like vegan keto that can work if they are well planned. And so the idea is really about creating whatever your diet choice is, make it well formulated. Okay, so a well formulated ketogenic diet in the form of therapeutic carb restriction is when your foods, your intake meet metabolic targets, okay, for nutrients, micronutrients, but then also puts you into that therapeutic range, okay? So these are therapeutic tools. These are not just trends. These are not just fads. When they are well formulated, they are therapeutic. So I wanted to highlight a couple of the new articles that were coming out in terms of ketogenic therapy, because this is a really controversial topic. And you tend to be either on one side or the other. All right. And so Here are six of the most impactful clinical studies that have come out recently, really supporting the role of ketogenic diets in mental health care. They span case reports, feasibility trials, there's retrospective analysis. Um, so there's a whole range within there. Um, a couple, I won't go through all of these, but I will send them out in the resources. All right. But uh, Dr. Shabani Sethi and her colleagues did a pilot trial. It was one of the first formal studies looking at people with bipolar disorder or schizophrenia, all with metabolic abnormalities. And after just 4 months on a ketogenic diet, participants saw significant improvements in psychiatric symptoms and metabolic measures like weight, insulin, and visceral fat. Okay. Just recently, like this month, uh, Palmer and McDonald released a case series, and it was the first of its kind to report full remission of OCD using a ketogenic diet. They had 3 patients that had severe treatment resistant OCD, and they all improved dramatically within weeks of starting the diet. When they went off the diet, their symptoms returned. Okay, so that's a great way to know, is this a therapeutic intervention? Is you put it in there, it gets better. You take it out, things get worse again, right? Okay. Um, and then it ranges, right? From everything looking at depression to anxiety to those with, again, serious mental illnesses, but finding results. So, complete remission of major depression in Nicole Lorentz recent study. She showed that the participants went from a PHQ-9 score of 25 all the way down to 0. And when she looked at GAD-7, which is for the, generalized anxiety, the score went from 3 to 0. And that was just in 8 weeks. So overall, we're looking at really 2, 3, 4 months intervention, and results are being seen in these studies. Okay. Now, the Nutrition Network does have a research portal, and it's an excellent resource for staying current because the field is blossoming right now in terms of metabolic psychiatry. And so, again, I will send out those links and resources to you. So, if we want to make this practical, how can we put this intervention in today, right? What can we start doing today? Well, first and foremost, begin with real food. Okay, get rid of the ultra processed foods. Build meals around, adequate amounts of protein, non-starchy vegetables, those with higher fiber, okay, and healthy fats. Fats are not your enemy when they're the healthy forms of fats. So, you know, omega-3 fats, monounsaturated fats, think avocados, fatty fish, those sorts of things, okay? But avoid those processed snacks, sugary drinks, those refined processed seed oils, all right? So essentially, choose a whole nutrient dense diet. Plants, quality proteins, healthy fats, and limit ultra processed items. You can add in fermented foods to support the microbiome, things like yogurt or sauerkraut. Optimizing sleep and circadian rhythms. So, reducing blue light exposure in the evening, dimming lights, getting morning sunlight, and sticking to more consistent sleep and wake times. Moving regularly, right? Walking, yoga, strength training, whatever that looks like for you, whatever brings you joy in terms of movement. But spend time in nature. That can reduce stress hormones, inflammation. You also need sunlight. Okay, you really need sunlight. Sunlight helps with vitamin D. Vitamin D helps with serotonin synthesis. So don't underestimate the power of community and connection either. Connection to nature, connection to others, connection to yourself. Okay, and so really cultivate those practices, that community. And those are really the basics that form the foundation of restoring metabolic and mental health. And so you can see here on the slide, there's actually a fabulous resource that was just put out by Metabolic Mind. And it's called their Think Smart framework. And it walks you through how to, if you're wanting to incorporate some of these therapeutic carbohydrate restrictive types of practices for better mental and physical health, how do you do that? What does that look like? But then also, that's the think, but then the smart, moving through some of those lifestyle strategies that are going to support those endeavors. Okay. And if you are looking for a clinician to help you work through this, diagnosisdiet.com has a directory of trained clinicians, so you don't have to go this alone. Again, highly recommended that we are not going alone. So, when doing this, if we're looking at nutrients for brain health, just very quickly, think about your B vitamins. They're critical cofactors for energy production, neurotransmitters. You need minerals like magnesium and zinc and iron to support those same systems, and antioxidants as well to fight that oxidative stress and inflammation. Okay, think about foods like fish, shellfish, oysters, kale, liver, seeds, nuts, leafy greens, cruciferous vegetables. That's really what we're talking about. Some of those have some of the, they're the most dense sources of some of those nutrients. Okay. So just summarizing that, beneficial foods for those three M's, okay, can essentially be summed up into eat your, uh, eat your rainbow. I don't mean Skittles. Okay. Talking about colorful vegetables, things of that nature, but get outside in nature, see the sunlight. Like I said, you need that as well. And then that really translates into what you see there: fruits, vegetables. You've got your adequate protein, your healthy fats, that fiber, and those things that are going to support that microbiome as well. So, thinking about if you do want to start to make this transition, start with nutrient dense whole foods. Mediterranean diet is a great place to start. And then if you want to progressively move into more of a therapeutic dietary form, okay, think about what suits your needs and your goals, and what is your medical professional willing to support you in helping you move through those different options that we discussed. And so if we look at Dr. Georgia Eads' framework, she has a nourish, protect, and energize. And she says that's how you know if a diet is good, right, for brain health. Does it nourish, does it protect, and does it energize? So I've expanded this a bit to say, okay, well, let's not just look at the diet. Let's look at, this more holistically. Okay. Nourish. All right. Yes, that could be whole foods, essential nutrients, gut support, but we can also nourish our soul with meaningful interaction. Okay. We can protect, right, with food. We can reduce inflammation, but we can also do that by managing stress and eliminating toxins. Okay. That feeds the mitochondria. How can we feed and protect the mitochondria? Thinking about nourishing and protecting, and then energizing. Again, we're supporting those powerhouses, we're supporting metabolic flexibility, but also move, sleep, regulate our emotions. Those impact our energy levels as well. And so you can think about this framework as really a personalized guide for comprehensive brain care recovery. And so the final takeaway, I'll leave you with this and we'll go into a Q&A. But if you take one thing today, let it be this, all right? Mental health is not just in your head. It's in your cells, and it is deeply, deeply metabolic. Recovery depends on restoring energy, reducing inflammation, and reconnecting the gut, brain, and mitochondria. Okay, and it's that axis that acts as your roadmap. And food is one of the most powerful tools that we have to influence it. Okay, so hopefully you have found this hopeful and empowering, because to me, that's how I see it. It means that mental illness is not a permanent sentence and that recovery is possible. And I am actually living proof of that. Okay. So thank you for joining me. I will send out these resources for you. Make sure you get those. Amy will send those out. And then I will open it to questions. If you would like to send me an email, if you have questions as well, feel free to do that. Um, I'm more than happy to clear up any confusion, extra questions, or anything like that for you. So again, thank you for showing up today and being here with me. I know we've covered a lot. All right.
Yeah, thank you so much. We'll go into a time of Q&A. If you have extra questions, please feel free to put them in the Q&A. A couple to start out with. One that we've received says, will you please explain again how ketones fuel neurons directly, how they're a workaround for insulin resistance?
So with ketones, it is a very clean energy source, but essentially they allow for the body not to have to rely on the glucose. So they can serve as that energy source while you are working to build or rebuild your insulin sensitivity. Because when you have insulin resistance, um, you often have, those elevated glucose levels, but as your cells become resistant to insulin, the glucose can't get in. So your brain is swimming in glucose. Like it's not that it's not there, but the glucose can't get into fuel. So your brain is starving of energy at that point. It is in an energy crisis. Ketones can get in and add and be that energy source. I hope that explains it.
I put your email address in the chat just in case anybody wanted to capture that. Um, we've also got, so a question on my end is, all of us would love to eat healthier foods and would love to stick to, a much more clean, real foods diet. If somebody is struggling right now with budgetary concerns, with the high cost of groceries, etc., what are some ways that they could do this without having to rely on expensive organic produce and kind of upscale Whole Foods kind of stores?
Okay, so couple of things. Um, One, check out the environmental working group, right? Um, Not a lot of people have the funds to buy organic everything, right? So be more targeted. If there are certain products you want to buy organic, check out the environmental working group. They typically do a dirty dozen, which tells you the ones that are most contaminated with the pesticides. And so that is one way to save money. You're not buying everything organic, but you just the most contaminated products. All right. So that would be a resource. That's an option. But moving beyond that, there was a study that just came out that said even doing these therapeutic carb types of ketogenic therapies, right? A lot of times we hear that it's not within budget. It cost participants just over $1.25 a day extra. Okay, so you think about you give up one Starbucks coffee for the week, and you've pretty much covered that additional food cost. Okay, so putting it in perspective like that, but then buying frozen, right? So if you're going to, for produce, the way that they flash freeze produce these days, um, can lock in as many nutrients, sometimes more nutrients than fresh food. So, and I know that's surprising, but you would really be surprised at the average age of the fresh apple that's sitting in your store. Okay. So buying frozen is often cheaper. Um, Buying in bulk works. If that's within your budget as well, you can often get discounts that way. And then, preparing batch meals and using the leftovers throughout the week would all be ways to kind of cut food cost.
Great. Yeah, I think we can all get started on something small and just build up to that. I think you answered this question, but I just wanted to kind of reiterate it. Some basic things that we can go ahead and do. Like if we say we want to take this home today and make a couple, like the top three major or minor changes that we can make starting today to start this process.
So I actually prefer, if you're starting this process, to start slow.
Hmm.
Okay. So think about maybe the Mediterranean type of eating pattern as your first step in. All right. What does that look like for you? Okay. It's probably going to incorporate how can you cut out additional sugars? That would be a major step in the right direction. What can you do to eat more whole foods, right? And reduce the ultra processed types of foods. So, depending on how much restriction you're wanting to come in, it could be something simple like, hey, you know what? I want to eat an extra salad a week, or I want to eat an extra apple a week, right? We always talk about doing these really small, like micro sorts of goals. And so anytime that you are working towards behavior change, right? Think about those incremental steps. If our rungs on our ladder are this big, not many of us can actually make that step, right? But a lot of us can make a step that's this small. So, what are those steps for you? Um, I would say, what is anything that would cut sugar, ultra processed foods, um, increase fruits, vegetables, eat the rainbow, right? Those sorts of things, those are all doable types of small changes. And then you can build from there.
Yeah, great. Well, again, thank you so much. I mean, this has given, I'm sure, all of us something to chew on as we go about our day. And thank you so much for just providing your expertise. We really appreciate having you. We appreciate having all of you here. Thank you so much for attending today. Please note that if you need help navigating any of these issues or just want extra help from NAMI in general with mental health issues, I'm putting our helpline information in the chat. Please feel free to make use of that. Um, Also, keep an eye out, like I said, for Friday. Amber's going to provide some additional resources for us. I'll have a feedback survey. We'd love getting your feedback and a video version of this webinar. So in case you want to go back, take notes, etc., you'll have that. Also, keep an eye out for information about our next NAMI at noon. We are looking at workplace mental health to celebrate Mental Health Awareness Month. So we'll have a couple of participants from the North Carolina Department of Revenue on a panel about how their workplace mental health program has been assisting employees with fighting burnout. And that's going to be a really great conversation. So that will take place on May 7th. We hope to see you guys there. Otherwise, have a wonderful afternoon and take care of yourselves.